I mentioned that one of the things we were going to do at this summit is we're going to reflect, we're going to look forward, we're going to collaborate. We have a real treat for us the next 30 minutes, which is we have our executive chairman of Google, Schmidt, along with Carie Lemack, who is a remarkable woman who I've known for a number of years, co-founder of the Global Survivors Network, has a film called Killing in the Name that was nominated for an Oscar. They're going to be engaging in a fireside chat to look at kind of the question of why are we doing this, but also looking forward at where technology is going. And given the empowerment bias that technology has, what could the future of violent extremism look like, and what could the future of how we address violent extremism look like? Carie, Eric, welcome to the stage.
Well, good morning. How is everyone? Great. Well, it's an honor for me to be here, and I first have to add my thanks to Jared for inviting me to be here, for Google for having us all here, for the Council on Foreign Relations and the Tribeca Film Festival. I think even the fact that we've just been here for less than a day, we've already had an amazing impact, and it's really an honor for me to be here. I should tell you perhaps why I'm here. I'm here to represent my mom, Judy LaRock, who was murdered on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. And I think my mom would get a real hoot out of this conference because she loved technology, and she herself was an entrepreneur. And I know that in the audience, we're surrounded by a large number of technology lovers and entrepreneurs. My mom began her career working for Digital Equipment Corporation, which some people in the audience may remember, perhaps maybe just up here, the two of us. She then worked for a company called BBN, which did create the internet. And thank you. I'm glad someone else knows.
Goldbermick and Newman.
Yep, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in 1993, she decided that she wanted to use her entrepreneurial spirit and start her own company. So when she was killed in 2001, she was the CEO of a small firm outside of Massachusetts that did market research in the technology industry. And one thing that my mom taught me and my sister was to be an entrepreneur, and that if you saw a problem, you should go out and fix it. So when my mom was murdered, I realized that we needed to do whatever we could to make sure that what happened to her and what happens to so many other innocent people around the globe never happens again. And in the last 9.5 years, I've had the opportunity to work with a large number of incredible people, people that one 9/11 widow said to me are the best group of people I never wanted to meet. And many of them are in this room. You just met Jill Hicks, who I'm glad to count as one of my dearest friends. You might meet Febi, who's standing right over there. He is an Indonesian man who was going about his business one day when a bomb went off at the JW Marriott in Jakarta and was injured. He was burned over 42% of his body. You may get to meet Tahir, who's sitting right over there, a Pakistani man who brought his wife to work one day and about a few hours later went to pick up her body because she was killed when the UN World Food Program was bombed in Islamabad. And together we've said our voices need to be heard. Our voices need to be louder than those of the extremists. We need to provide the counter-narrative so that those who are sympathetic to the grievances of extremists might have an opportunity to hear the other side. And so we co-founded an organization called Global Survivors Network. And we've been speaking out, and hopefully people have been listening. So today I'm humbled to be sitting here, and I think my mom would be so excited that I get to interview and talk with the Executive Chairman of Google, Mr. Schmidt. He doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to have to give one anyway, because I think if I don't, I get kicked out.
No.
You know that his work at Google, you know he's been working in technology for a very long time and knows a lot about it, and he's going to talk more about how it can interact with countering violent extremism. He also just won the Cannes Lions Media Person of the Year Award, which is pretty fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And he's also the chair of the New America Foundation, which recently released a report on de-radicalization, so maybe we can hear a little bit about that. But if you don't mind, I'd love to kick it off to ask a question that I think a lot of us are probably wondering. For so many of us in the room, this issue of violent extremism is incredibly personal. We heard it in the last panel. I can see it in the faces. And I'm wondering, how is this personal for you? and what made you want to put on this summit?
Well, thank you very much. And I want to add my thanks to Jim Lindsay of the CFR and the entire CFR staff, as well as Jane at Tribeca and the other people who've made this possible. It's sort of humbling to be here. I'm an example of the people who have not had these sorts of tragedies by a combination of being born in the right country and being lucky. I haven't faced some of the challenges that people in this room have. And it's very hard to relate to some of these stories. They're just so fundamentally, I don't know how to say disturbing, but it's like just a tremendous tragedy to have to go through. And my heart goes out to each of you, either because you were forced into a structure that you could not get out of, or some horrific thing occurred, such as what happened with you. So from a Google perspective, Google tries to come up with new ideas to make the world a better place. And you might as well start with the facts. And so the facts are represented here in the room. And one of the things that I've noticed about humanity is that humanity is sort of always locked in this permanent state of current outcomes. Whatever the current discussion is, there's a point of view and an opposite point of view. And any new idea is immediately attacked by one of the two or three or four sides that's seen as threatened by it. Often threatened because of their academic position or their intellectual position or so forth. But as scientists and as people who believe optimistically that the world can be changed, we acknowledge that new facts can occur, that there can be, in fact, new ideas, that new technologies can come along. I would hope that the technologies that I have had a chance to work with over the many years are overwhelmingly positive, but there are plenty of examples where technologies that I've been associated with in one form or another can also be used for bad outcomes. So I have a technology positive bias, I would say, on this. But fundamentally, what we want to do here is we want to come up with some solutions. Jared, of course, who's a superstar in his own right, when we originally said, let's put Google ideas together, the idea was to have a sort of a think tank. And he said, we don't want a think tank, we want a think and do tank. And I said, only Jared would come up with such a line.
And a great line that it is. And since you bring that up, what is the do part of Google Ideas?
Well, you're going to have to ask Jared. But the rough argument goes like this. So our idea was that there's an awful lot of convening authorities where really smart people in a relatively selective setting, people who are extraordinarily expert in something, get together and they try to sort things out. In the modern era, these events are relatively public, they're videotaped, they're tweeted, and so forth and so on, as part of having many people who cannot attend participate. So that's sort of the think part. Jared's position, when we discussed it and set it up, was that he was not satisfied with that solutions, when you gather people together, you've got to come up with a path, an ownership, an outcome. You know, my general rule is that 80% of life is showing up. Right? And if you just get everybody together, they'll figure it out. Jared would argue that that's good enough. That's not good enough. That fundamentally you have to get everybody together, which is great, which we're doing today, but that there's a responsibility that we all, and I mean all of us together, is to figure out what to do about this. I have some opinions. I would argue I'm the least educated on these issues in the entire room, and I think all of us learn from those conversations. If you're intellectually curious and you're not holding on to your stereotypical view of any particular issue, you're going to make a lot more progress in figuring these things out, and that would be my advice.
What does success look like for this summit?
A lot will depend on whether people, as they leave, do something, hopefully a good thing, by the way. And usually society moves forward by getting people who are passionate about things to find other people like themselves, and they band together to solve some problem. What I would like to see here is a significant conversation about how technology, which is sort of my own bias, can help sort of advance this. If you listen to this extraordinary panel that we just went through, I kept thinking, so if each and every one of these people, when they were 14 and 15, had other sources of information, other people to talk to, other ways of communicating, other ways of being exposed to new ideas, would the same outcome have occurred? Would it have been a better outcome or a worse outcome? Would it be different? I'm not saying I know, but I have a suspicion that we now have in the next decade or so, because of the tools that are being invented in my industry and all around us, we have an opportunity to actually have a very, very different experience for the future 14-year-old who's being radicalized in a culture of poverty and hate.
And it's been said that you like to make projections. So when you're talking about that future experience for a 14-year-old, where do you think that's going to be in 5 or 10 or 20 years?
Well, one of the observations is that we've gone from a situation where in my lifetime, certainly, the world's information was owned and controlled by a very small Western elite. A very small number of people had access to that information. So during my lifetime, essentially all the world's information will be available to virtually all of the human beings on the planet. If you assume there's on the order of 7.5 billion people, it's reasonable to expect in the next 5 years that we'll end up with 5 to 6 billion of those having web-capable mobile devices of one sort or another. Sort of take the current generation of smartphones, and as technology improves and the cost declines, it's possible to imagine people will have that. So for us, when a new smartphone, this is my, where's my Nexus? Where is it over here? My Nexus S, it's like, this is a really big deal. We really like our phone. We're very excited about it, and so forth and so on. When this shows up in a rural village where there's no textbooks, there's only one language, the only knowledge is the knowledge that's passed out by the local elders, there's exactly one religion and so forth, somebody who's curious, this is a life-changing moment for them. And we don't appreciate how profound the arrival of information of all kinds is to people. I'm one of these people who believes that when that occurs, it's a really positive effect.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the fact that if you do have technology in the hands of all the people, do you think it can be a help or a hindrance in countering violent extremism, and how?
Well, let's go through some scenarios. So part of the secret of sort of teenage, I'm going to use I know this is the simplest thing. Let's talk about teenage boys, having been one. You have to give them some choices, and you have to give them some information, and you have to basically get them excited about some things that are other than what they're currently doing. Every one of them is going to have some kind of a mobile device. Every one of those devices will be used for entertainment and for education. So let's start with that as a premise. So the first is, what's the channel that you would want to create that would send information to that particular stereotype? And again, you all are the experts, the programmers, if you will, of that. What are the shows? What are the messages? How would you get their attention? How would you not look like the bureaucracy, but rather their friend? How would you, as the earlier gentleman indicated, how would you insert doubt? Because once the doubt is in there, then the demagoguery gets a little bit cut. And that, to me, is a starting point. It's unclear to me whether the humanistic images, look at the impact of what you're doing and so forth, here's the outcome of your actions. It's unclear to me whether that would change things, but I'll let the experts in the room try to figure that out. And to me, the way you do this is you test it, right? I'm a scientist, so let's flood the market with a bunch of these ideas, and let's see whether one kind of a channel, one kind of approach, one kind of programming actually works. And I think with the kind of energy that people like yourself have on this, you have a lot of time to work on this. You care very passionately about this. So you have the time to think about how would you reach that person or that demographic or that segment. And obviously it's per culture, per religion, per sex and so forth and so on.
So I think for a lot of us in the room, it's interesting that it's Google that's invited us here. It's not a government, it's not another NGO. Can you talk a little bit about how industry can play a role in this issue and potentially lead on it?
Well, ultimately, Google is simply a convener of this. We're trying to promote new ideas, and we're trying to set an example for other global corporations. By the way, every corporation has some sort of philanthropic activity. Google has some unusual and we think very powerful approaches to this, which we're very proud of. But the point is that corporations have, we're more than just trying to serve our shareholders. We're also literally trying to serve our citizens, our customers, and so forth and so on. It's important also to sort of establish some limits for what corporations can do. The fact of the matter is that this is a complex cultural issue involving the way the police works, the way social services work, the way cultural and messaging works, and these conflicts are typically derived from hundreds of years of people complaining about each other. And the fact of the matter is people have memory, and they remember what happened to their grandparent or so forth and so on. And I think the only way I know of to address that is with more information. The solution of less information has produced the following outcome. Let's see if we can do something with more information.
So in an effort to make sure everyone's engaged in this conversation, I think we should open it up to
Absolutely.
Q&A, if that sounds good to you. So I know it's really tough to be the first person out there, but there are a lot of brave souls in this room. So if you can raise your hand, right over there, and I think that, will there be a mic? Yes, right there.
Testing.
And if you could say your name and your
My name is
affiliation,
Rudy
great.
Corpus from San Francisco. I'm from an organization called United Players. I work with a lot of kids. I was writing down some notes, and I just wanted to share with Eric that this is just an idea I think that would work. Jared was saying 52% of people in the world is under 30, but 97% of kids are on computers. They play games. And idea that I thought was to have the kids create the games that they make to learn how to stop the violence, games that are compassionate for them to stay away from gangs, to not join, radical, not to join radical groups that are extremists, but have the kids create these games that would be hip, that would be cool for them to make, so they would because like 97% of the kids are on computers now, and most of them are playing games that are about killing and destroying. That's just an idea.
Okay. I love that idea. Some interesting observations about multiplayer games. The computing power that's in the game console, literally the graphics and so forth that children are using now, is typically more powerful than that on a personal computer. So the industry has responded with an awful lot of energy around the infrastructure to make what you described possible. There are applications that people can build, suites and so forth that people can build multiplayer games. And what I like about this next generation of multiplayer games, which are web-based, is that they're global, right? That they can really reach, and that the barrier to entry is relatively low, that you can just put one up and off you go. And they also use a lot of video as well as voice. So I agree with that entire philosophy. One of the things to remember is that if your child, teenager, is at home playing games, they're not going to get in nearly as much trouble as if they're out of the home. And so keeping them there, keeping them interactive and so forth and so on, they're at least physically safe. And you have, as a parent, you have some level of control of where they are.
Right back here, Henry?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just saying, because, computers could be a gift or they could be a curse.
Yeah.
So maybe the next summit could be a summit with kids for Google.
Right, and also, how do they build the tools themselves that keep them, if you will, focused and off the streets?
There you go. Thank you.
Now we've got our next to-do, right? Henry? The mic is coming, just
Yeah,
one
let's
second.
grab the
sorry.
mic so people on YouTube can see it.
It's actually a question about YouTube, Eric, and about extremism. I know technology can be used for good, but at the minute there's a lot of extremism on YouTube, a lot of extreme messages, and I wonder how you feel about that and what you might do to take those messages off.
We have a very well-developed now policy about what's okay on YouTube and what's not. One of the principles about this sort of crowdsourcing of information is you see what people are really doing is what you thought they're doing. And people do amazingly bad and sort of inappropriate things, and then they upload them. So we have a pretty serious policy about, for example, incitements to hate, calls to violence, and so forth. I think people can disagree as to where that line is, and I suspect that what you're talking about is that there is a line, and beyond a line, there's a set of things that we won't take, that we will leave on. So, for example, we've had a lot of discussion about religious speech and discussion about religion, and whether we want to sort of take that stuff off of YouTube or not. And it's not a simple decision, right? People disagree and so forth and so on. What happens is if somebody puts up something which violates our terms of service, so for example, a video of somebody being beaten or so forth and so on, it is sourced, the audience, if you will, flags it, and we take it down within some number of minutes. And we do that because it violates all sorts of either laws or terms of service or so forth and so on. So we want to distinguish between the videos which you and I might not like, and there are plenty of them, I suspect, but which are legal and okay for us to have on YouTube, and then the ones which are inappropriate and get on and are almost immediately taken off. And it is the latter group that I'm really worried about, because the quicker we can get that stuff down, less of an impact it can have on evil or confused minds.
And I think with the former group, what could be interesting is how do you turn that around on its head? And one idea that we have had is taking extremist videos and bringing in victims, splicing them in to address some of those comments that they make, so that when someone is Googling these extremist comments and they see this YouTube video, sometimes they're going to get our version of the video and have to deal with the realities of what terrorism or violent extremism can be.
We really like this notion of a response. So if somebody writes something, we really want to figure out ways for somebody to respond to it, so that the citizen, the viewer, the reader can actually see multiple points of view. Google is not in the position of trying to establish moral values in some of these things. We're not trying to pick a religion. We're not a government and that kind of thing. It's not our job. But we do want to give people some choices that then they can, using proper educational frameworks, try to decide which is right and which one is wrong.
I think right over here.
Hello, my name is Dan Dubno. Used to be at CBS, now I'm
Yes, hi,
doing
Dan.
a foundation. We know each other for a long time. But I'm now working on something to try to use social media to allow people to whistleblow on terrorism, particularly directed at scientists. One of the big problems is allowing people to anonymously communicate whistleblowing information. And basically, if you want to do so with anonymity, there needs to be a more simple method so that people are not caught by governments who are not interested in having this information out there. Similarly, you've seen with the Arab Spring the need for transparency, and Google has suffered so with China and other countries snooping into people's Gmail accounts and others. How far can Google go to get itself involved, knowing the difficulty, knowing the role that Google wants to play as a universal kind of technology, not being a political entity, but how far can Google go to support the springs, the Arab Spring, the social networks to allow people to uncover terrorism, to provide anonymity to those who need anonymity? How far do you feel Google can go, and how committed are you to those things, and what are the drawbacks?
So there is a limitation. The limitation is when the police arrest our employees and they torture them. And so there is, in fact, a limit, and it's important to state right up front that we think about this a lot. We've taken a position that we are extremely proud of the Arab Spring, and in particular of what Wael did, and we've said so, and I've said so publicly, and that's unusual for a corporation to take. We've also taken a position that the censorship, the active censorship that's required essentially by law and practice in mainland China, although not in Hong Kong, is not acceptable to Google. In fact, we moved to Hong Kong, so the Chinese had to do it themselves. So we've taken, if you will, a moral or at least a business position that's consistent with those values. There is a limit. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that in order to operate in countries, we have to have our employees. We've had physical employees there, and our employees are at some risk of arrest by judges and police who don't understand that these particular employees had nothing to do with it. So a typical example is there will be a dawn raid in the police office. Why they show up at dawn is beyond me because there's nobody there. It's sort of maybe they watch some movie, and they raid all their computers, which of course have nothing to do with anything that Google's doing because Google servers are in another country. We're having a lot of trouble now with countries which have laws that, although they appear to be reasonable, in fact are intended to shut down some of these conversations. We are routinely finding ourselves in a situation where YouTube, for example, is banned, even though it was one video. And as you know, YouTube has literally millions of videos. And what we've tried to argue is that shutting down the internet is bad for your country, and that blocking YouTube as a whole is bad for your country. And if there's a specific video which, according to your law, really does violate your law, then we will do whatever we can to sort of IP block or so forth. What I've learned in this is that there's no single policy and there's no simple answer. Each country is different and each case is different.
Do you feel that Google Will Google be more aggressive in the future or measured?
Well, we have to be measured because of this. The company can't do random and irrational things, but more importantly, because of the risks that it applies to the individuals who work in the company. The fact of the matter is, I think this problem, I'm sorry to be negative on it, I think this problem is going to get worse. And the reason is that as the technology becomes more pervasive and as the citizenry gets completely wired and as the content gets localized to the language of the country and not in English, it becomes an issue like television. And if you look at television in most of these countries, television is highly regulated because the leaders, dictators, partial dictators or sort of half dictators, whatever you want to call them, they understand the power of television imagery to keep their citizens in some bucket. And I'm sure that they'll want to apply similar rules to the internet. It's an uncomfortable, but I think necessary tension. And Google has proven our ability to fight these things. And in some cases we win, and in some cases we lose.
So here?
Carie, on a lighter note, I'd like to share an experience that I had, and this is related to what he said about an iPhone reaching the middle of a village where nothing else is available. I have a friend in Islamabad. He's a tailor by profession, upscale tailor. He's about 64 or so, and he's a Shamalan, a faith healer. Every Saturday, if you go to his shop, you find about a line of about over 200 people waiting to see him and get healed. So one day, we were talking, and he asked me what Pharaoh looked like. We were discussing Moses. Luckily, I had my laptop with me and my dongle with me, so I just went on to Google and took out the picture of the Pharaoh and showed it to him. That was the first time in my life I saw a 60-year-old man literally sitting, speechless, and gawking at the monitor of the computer. Now, since that was, I think, in 2008, almost every month or 6 weeks, he calls me and he says, "What does your computer say about such and such a thing?"
That's good.
So the next day I go back to him, sit with him in the shop, open my computer, Google it, and tell him what my computer says about it.
That's great.
So that's something, and I think if we continue with this and Google ideas, I'm doing also, so if everybody starts the idea and do it, maybe we'll have more Master Mushtaqs getting enlightened along the way. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing to here. Right over here, ma'am? Yeah, you.
Hi, Angela King, consultant, speaker, and I may know a little bit about hate groups. I apologize in advance for putting you on the spot.
I'm used to it.
I imagine you are. I have seen reflected in a lot of the conversations that I've had here a thought that has been running through my mind, and that is, please tell us that this isn't a one-hit wonder, that this is something that Google is going to be committed to long-term, and this isn't going to be just a one-time thing.
It will not be a one-time thing.
Thank you.
That's great. Back here? Abdul Haq?
Yeah, thanks. Abdul Haq Baker, director and founder of Street in UK, London. Just a question coming back to YouTube and what's actually happening on there. And I commend the efforts that have been taken forward. But there is an undercurrent that I think my colleague who's talking about the youth here, it exists where there's a proliferation of gang-related and violent extremist YouTube videos that are being posted up. And there's a terminology that's being used where I think it's falling below the radar of those who are monitoring the screens. Now, some of your colleagues like Brendan Ballou, I've been working with algorithms and things with him on that, and actual killings are taking place as a result of the postings of these YouTubes. And I can talk about South London alone. You'll see particularly, and I showed, we've got Mark Sageman here. When he visited us, we put the YouTube videos up for him to see. Okay. This was one gang incident. This was the hit that took place. Here's the violent extremism rhetoric that's taken place. This is where these individuals have travelled to. So I think it's key that not only do you have regional teams that are looking at peculiarities and particular terminology that's being used, but also in those particular regions that you have what we're currently doing, which is a deconstruction of those particular videos. So when somebody Googles, as Carie mentioned, that deconstruction of those violent extremist videos are being placed up. Because as I said, in South London alone, the proliferation of murders from watching particular videos is very, very high.
Thank you for that. And obviously, we may not be aware of unobvious signals and gang signals and so forth and so on, which you can point out. And the Google people here, if you can't get what you need from them, just talk to me directly. I have a question for you. Are these videos, in your opinion, illegal in Britain, or are they in fact legal but despicable?
I think they're very highly illegal because you're seeing Mac 10s, AK-47s being shown. You've got CCTV footage that's been stolen, showing gangs moving into an estate, shooting, killing individuals. Then you've seen the reprisal from the other gangs stealing from that estate, CCTV. Now also as well, I think when we're looking at some of the debates that are taking place, there are death threats on those videos.
Right, which is
and they've been enacted. But what I recall, if I remember, it happened to some of us where certain death threats were put up and transferred across the UK. They're still on the YouTube videos now. And I think because of the language, the religious terminology, the street terminology, it's been ignored. Addresses were given. I'll even say mine, for example. My address abroad was put up. This is where he is if you need to hit him.
Oh my goodness.
So addresses are actually up there on that. And even though complaints were made by colleagues, they wrote up on Google, death threats have been placed here.
So again, this is clearly not legit in our policy and clearly illegal. So
yes, as I said,
let me just apologize on
No, that's okay. That's fine. This is the work that we're in. It's okay. But a regional task force that is attuned to these nuances, I think will pick these things up a lot more quickly.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I think just from what Abdul Haq just said, we know that the threat is very real. This is something we need to address, and you've told us it will be successful if we go out and do. So are there any final words you want to say to the audience?
Well, obviously, here's some examples of some very specific tactical issues that we need to address. What I would like you all to do is to help us figure out a way where the merger of best practices and technology can get an outcome that is quick and definitive and measurable. That's how you change things. Everyone in this room is so committed to this. I know you have the energy, and we certainly have the resources and the time. Thank you so much, Carie.
Thanks.